Don't be intimidated by my artistic ability. It takes years to learn how to draw like this, but right now we're going to talk about file saving. When you get started, PaintLink is going to be saving files to disk, but you're not necessarily going to know where. There's this PaintLink folder, and it's probably not going to have a lot in it. But when you go to File Save, it's going to populate with a bunch of folders here. So what are these and how do we make sense of these? Well, first, if you right-click one and then go Reveal in Explorer, let's look at the overall structure. Here's our After Effects file. It's under Users Chris Dropbox PaintLink 27 File Saving 1.aep, and you can see that here. When you save your project, PaintLink is going to create this new folder right next to the project under the same name, _PaintLink. And in here, you're going to have a handful of different folders. And inside of these, you're going to have Psds. But what do these numbers mean? Here I have an instance of PaintLink. And down under File Management, you can see this says folder number 39. So let's go into 39. And you can see all these Psds. So each of these Psds corresponds to one of these. Let's go to this one here, this house. And you can see this is folder number 35. Well, in After Effects, even though you can't actually see it, every one of these layers that you make, each of these solids, is going to have an index number. That's something determined by After Effects, not by us at aescripts and PaintLink. It just is what it is. So what we do is for each of these, you can see the number there, we just display what the folder number is, and inside are all of the Psds for that layer. So let's go back to this wonderfully animated sun layer, number 39. Well, you may be thinking all these names are total nonsense and I don't want to deal with that. Well, neither do I. That's why we have this option, Reduce and Sequence Psds. When you click this, it's first going to look at any old Psds that no longer exist and delete them. And if you're wondering why there are more Psds in here on disk than there actually are in the timeline, there's actually a very good reason for that. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to add a new keyframe and I'll just draw some nonsense. And then I decide this was bad news. I don't want this at all. For the record, you can see that this is the PSD name, 4952 whatever. And you can see that PSD is here. Okay, so now I decide I hate this moving around. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to delete it. And maybe I continue working in After Effects, doing whatever. And you would think, why isn't this getting deleted from disk? Well, we don't know if you're going to have to undo this later. So if I press Ctrl Z and then I undo, now this frame is safe. And that's exactly why we can't delete these on the fly. We only remove old Psds when you make the conscious choice to press this button. So I'll press Reduce and Sequence, make sure to read this and understand it, press Yes. And now these 9 keyframes are numbered 1 through 9. And in all these other folders, they're also labeled 1 through 9. So something interesting happens. I'm just going to take a look at this animation, and you'll notice that these are just the same frames over and over. I'm going to actually just delete that bad frame again. That was probably number 9. And I'm going to copy these keyframes, and I'm going to paste them. And now you'll see 8 new Psds have been made for these 8 keyframes. And what is the purpose of this when we know that these are exact copies? Well, the issue is that we don't know when you're going to branch off and want to create changes to these drawings. So I'll grab this one here, which we know is an exact copy of the first frame, and I'll just draw with another color. And you can see that this frame has been updated, and this one has not. Which is good, because that could get very confusing if when we copied and pasted the keyframe, you couldn't keep making changes to one without changing the other. I'll press Reduce and Sequence again. So now what happens when you want to version up a file? We're working with file saving _ version 1. What if we do an increment and save to version 2? So what I want you to pay attention to here is I have this house layer, and this is a red house. Let's say that the first thing the director says is, I really love my red house. I'm going to go to File, Increment, and Save. So now you can see file saving version 2 exists, and we also have a duplicate folder, file saving version 2 underscore paint link. Now, you may think that this is wasteful, in that we know that all of the PSDs in this folder are exactly the same as this folder, but it's actually really important. I'm going to go to the house layer, and let's just say that we got notes somewhere along the line where they didn't want this house to be red anymore. Okay, fresh coat of paint. Now we have a pink house. Here's our animation in file saving version 2. And I say, this is awesome. Save. And then the director comes back and says, wait, I really love that red house. Well, now when we go back to file saving version 1, that's still preserved because it's a completely separate folder. So what you should take from this is that probably the best way to keep file size and bloat down is to delete any of the old files that you know you're not going to need. But also just be aware that every time you increment and save or save as, you're going to duplicate the folder of PSDs, which will eventually create quite a bit of bloat. Probably the last thing to mention with file management, and I probably wouldn't recommend doing this, but I think it's kind of cool and interesting, so let's take a look. I'm going to unselect paint link. Now, we're not kidding when we say paint link must be selected at all times to work in Photoshop. Once we have this unselected, the connection with Photoshop is broken. But if you wanted to, at this point, I guess there's really nothing stopping you from working with these PSDs in a more typical workflow. Okay, so this time, we'll make the house yellow. But of course, this change isn't going to show up. You would have to save it manually because you had opened it manually. And then the next time you select Paint Link, and select the house layer, it will actually show up. It's probably not a workflow that I would recommend because there's too many chances that you might forget to save or something strange might happen. But the reason why we have this like this is we could potentially see a situation where maybe After Effects is just completely closed. And maybe you want to work in Procreate or something, or work in some other software that isn't Photoshop or not After Effects. And now all these images are on disk and they're sequenced, and you can open them up and work with them in a very typical fashion. And as long as you remember to save them, the next time you close and reopen After Effects, all your changes will be there. So just to clarify, I would recommend using Paint Link exactly as it's intended. However, if you have After Effects closed, there's probably not going to be a problem if you open up these PSDs, edit them, save them, and close them, and then reopen After Effects later. But it's probably not a good idea to be working with the same PSDs at the same time, both using Paint Link and trying to open those files separately. Do one or the other.